Hi, my name is Mark Cassette. I'm head of marketing at Hatch, and today with me I've got Alex Rodríguez, who is the senior UX responsible within Hatch. How are you doing today, Alex?
Doing great, Mark. Thanks.
Yeah. So we will be talking today about conversion optimization. There's a lot of questions coming in from our clients, but also from other partners that we work with about how companies can actually enhance their customer journeys and to get the most conversion out of the changes that they're making. Now, one of the things that immediately comes to mind is, well, you've got a fair bit of UX happening there, but there's also CX, right? So customer experience. How would you see these two in relation to each other? I think it's good to get the basics clear first.
Mm-hmm.
What can you say about that?
I think it's pretty important to point out that there cannot be, or I believe there cannot be a proper CX without UX.
Okay.
I think UX is a very strong part of CX. And while UX is more focused into how the product is seen and how you interact with it and how the user is actually playing along with it, the CX is more of a general thing regarding more the brand and the general consumer experience,
Okay.
how you feel in relation to a brand, where UX is more focused on the end product.
Yeah.
Right?
So from a practical standpoint, which one do you think makes more sense for let's say a digital marketer to spend their or his attention on? Would that be UX or would it be CX?
I mean, at this point in how we're living right now, I think UX is going to be a very strong part of any strategy for any company. And knowing that this behaves as a global thing, as a whole, if you are stronger with your UX, you will be stronger with your CX, wanting or not. So I would definitely be focusing on UX.
How would a digital marketer go about and develop such a strategy in the first place, right? So how do they need to frame the entire UX and CX framework?
I think in terms of UX, there's two major things marketeers can focus on or can have a look at. I think one of them is the actual user flow on the website.
Okay.
As in how your user is reaching your website, how it's going to the product detail page, and how it's actually converting or consuming. And the other one is how actually that process takes place.
Yeah.
And you'll makes the overall experience intuitive for it.
What do you mean when you say how that process takes place?
Usually what we work with is what we call red routes.
Red routes, okay.
Which is the shortest path and the quickest path of action for a user. So you identify these paths, like in your case would be like having someone land on your website, navigate through the products and make a purchase.
Okay.
And you want that to be as easy and as intuitive as possible. So that will be the main focus point, the first stepping stone for this journey.
Now, let's just assume that I have absolutely no knowledge about this. Then you could argue, why don't we just put a buy now button on your homepage? Right, that's the shortest route.
That would be a
say.
super short route, absolutely.
Why wouldn't that work?
That unless you have only one product on your website, that would be a bit chaotic.
Okay,
of course, this all comes down to information architecture and how you're laid out. Of course, if you're a multi-country company, then your website will be more complex. There's a high chance that your products will be more difficult to reach.
Yeah.
And if you overcomplicate it, there's a super high chance you will get a drop rate. Like people or users will be hopping off the train.
That's actually a fair point. So if you overcomplicate it, what kind of mistakes do you come across very often, either with our clients' implementation or other implementations that you see in the market?
I think the most general issue is complexity.
Complexity. Okay.
Because of course, unless you have, again, this super magical single product, you want to have your full offer available for your consumer, right? And the thing is that it's often these things, you end up choosing one thing, the button is not very clear. When you reach that point, you have so many other sub options that by the time you get to the product detail page, there's a high chance you have gone through 8 or 9 clicks.
Okay. So you would say that just trying to get to the product you eventually want to buy, it takes you, well, maybe twice as many clicks as that you would have wanted it to be. Is there like a golden rule in the amount of clicks?
There's no golden rule, of course, but the higher the complexity, the higher the chance of drop rate.
Okay, but I can imagine if you've got a very complicated product, right? And let's be honest, many brands think they've got the most complicated product in the world because we want to offer everything as much as possible. But taking that into consideration, what are my options if I would be a brand that has a product that has multiple options?
I guess the best option for you, first of all, would be very clear on your website. Usually what we have is an overload of information. When you land on a big corporate site, you have all these tiny menus with all the infinite drop downs with infinite categories. And of course, it's complex. The more visual you make that, and the easier it is to actually to reach like a bigger section and then funnel it down to something easier to acquire. That would be a big impact for starters.
Okay. So are there any like quick guidelines you can give to digital marketeers who want to improve or just want to get started with improving their UX and eventually their CX, right? Because that's how it flows. Do you have any tips for anybody out there?
I think the best, let's go for homebrew tips. So something that does not require a fully fledged UX team or a big investment in development would be just go for the proper persona profiling.
Okay.
I mean, you need your personas and to understand who you're selling for. We have to remember that this is all about the user, and we should build things in a UCD environment, like a user-centered design, because what we're aiming for is to maximize this experience. If your user comes to your website and it's easy and it's nice, there's a massive chance that he will come back or recommend the website. So if you define your personas and your users, you're able to develop your user stories.
You're saying something interesting there. If they've had a good experience with regards to their UX or CX, they're bound to recommend your website. Is there a correlation between a good UX and brand loyalty? Or
absolutely. I mean, that's user satisfaction. If you go to a restaurant and food is good, fast, and great, there's a high chance when this conversation pops up, oh, I know this restaurant is really good. Now, if you're buying something, let's go for any specific product, a digital product, and you find this website where it's super easy to navigate. You have all the information, and it's like 3 clicks, and you see price comparisons and things of the sort, and you have a happy journey, let's say.
Okay.
There's a high chance that if someone asks you about it, or even in a casual conversation, yo, I was on this website, and it was really good. And that would really impact positively the CX, because in the end, CX will be perception of the brand. Having a very nice website with a very nice flow, with a happy customer, means good relation with the user and the brand.
Now, there's a lot of questions we get from our customers about this as well, which asks, does a happy flow per se lead to a higher conversion? And do we have any data to back that up?
We wish we did. But the beauty and the complexity of UX is that it's not a specific solid science for it. Like, it really depends on your users. It depends on your vertical. It depends on the time of the year. It depends on your product. There's so many different variables that there's not a universal marker for this. You can get some pointers more or less on what you would like to have. But even brands in the same vertical experience absolutely different numbers within their products. So there's not a magical number or solution to this.
Sort of triggers the adagium that I used to hear in the past, that people would say, blue buttons don't convert. You need to have absolutely green buttons to say something like that. But in the end, they were never able to replicate that because they didn't know. All they knew is you needed to have a button. So that was the only truth there. Is that something similar to what you're saying here, or?
It's a sense of similarity. In the end, I mean, you can get your recipes, but maybe if your website is absolutely white and there's nothing in it and you have a blue button, it will convert beautifully.
Yeah, okay.
So it really depends on context. And in the end, the essence of this, it's always A/B testing.
Yeah.
You need to test and test and test, because results that you get from a first quarter compared with the same segment, same time, same everything, 2 quarters away from that, it might be absolutely different. This is organic, so there's no way you can actually tie it down.
Well, that is an interesting thing. So, on the one hand, we are advocating everywhere, saying like data-driven marketing, everything needs to be data-driven. But from what I'm hearing you say is that, you need to test, you need to look at what the information is telling you, but you cannot look at big aggregated statistics to tell you what the concept will work. Now, what if I told you, I know that, I think you have a lot of experience with this as well within your organization, is that we do have customers that, for example, they implement our where-to-buy technology. And because there's perhaps, for whatever reason, it can be internal conflict, it can be what other reasons, they pretty much put the button of where you can buy it all the way at the right bottom of a website, or I don't know, the left bottom, because that would make more sense in this example. And then they say, well, the button doesn't convert, or conversion on this website or on this page isn't good in any case. Is there some tips you can give them with regards to that? Say like, okay, at least cover these few steps, these pointers, and that'll get you going in the right direction. Is there anything you can say about that?
Number one main pointer is like, ideally your CTA should always be above the fold.
Above the fold. That's immediately when the page loads, you can see it there.
That's your the viewport of your website.
Yeah.
If you place it somewhere else, that's fine, but you should have somewhere a button that will actually let you instantly access that point anytime.
Yeah.
Because you want to facilitate that purchase.
Okay. Yeah.
Also, second tip that we're very important is what we in UX have is called the font restore effect, meaning that there needs to be a contrast between elements. So if all your website is white and your button is also white, people will miss it. You need it to be a different shape, different color, high interaction, something different that will let you know that there's something happening with it. And that doesn't necessarily mean a conflict, because you can have different channels and have your own store and different store and such. You can have two different CTAs placed together and they will both convert beautifully if done right.
But exactly, so if done right, because doesn't that add to the complexity? I mean, if I would be a customer, I see like two buying options, that would put me off. How would I be, if I would be digital marketeer for that brand? How would I deal with that? What would be my best alternative?
I think that ties down to something as complex and simple as microcopies.
Microcopies.
If you have your copy and your CTA and your text is very clear on the action, because many times we work around it. Click here to find a store. That's too complex. Like buy now or find a store. That would be like two very simple things. Or buy online or buy other retailers, or have a different text. If those things are laid out properly, users will not be confused with it.
Okay.
If you have a brand CTA and your simple implementation is just a line of text that looks like plain text with a bit of an underline, people will miss that. And
because it's just too subtle.
It's way too subtle. And you don't have to be afraid. In the end, you're aiming for conversion. Doesn't matter if it's on our solution or your own web channels or whatever. The end goal of this is you actually get the numbers right.
Yeah, okay. But what about, I mean, maybe this isn't per se a UX, but would there be an argument, because I can imagine if you are responsible for a web shop, an e-commerce platform of a brand, and then there's this where to buy, which pretty much sucks away your potential traffic and brings it to a retailer. What would you tell somebody like that in terms of the customer experience on that product page? How would you tell them, like, okay, this is how it works and this is the benefit that it brings actually having both alternatives together?
I mean, the main instant benefit from this is that you have options. Like if you buy somewhere and you see two big buttons and both big buttons are going to let you purchase something, which is your end goal, you don't care if your purchase is through their own store or a different retailer. You want to get your product, and that's the only goal. And that's where we drop the ball with all the omni-channel solutions. And we have this channel conflicts, because the brand wants to have their own store, or you want to have this in this way or such. It doesn't really matter. Like your end goal is having the user buy your product.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't try to be afraid of that. And perhaps if that's a thing, you can always gain insight on it. If everyone is clicking on the external CTA for the retailer, perhaps you don't really need that store of yourself.
We even have some data proving that adding your own store to the retail list enhances the conversion as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think that we're doing a lot of data crunching on that still to actually get the numbers behind it. But it would, based on what you're telling me, it would make sense, because somebody is driven into a very simplified flow to be able to eventually purchase the product. When it comes to a customer journey itself, right? Is there anything you would say, okay, with regards to customer journey, so not UX per se, not CX per se, but the journey itself, would you have any advice?
In terms of quick testing, because it's hard to rebuild a website every month or so, right? But a dummy test is always a great option for this. Okay. So anyone can do this. You don't need a full team for it. You can just go for your partner or a friend or anyone and just ask him to perform an action in the quickest manner possible. Now, if that is taking a long time or is confusing, then you have an issue.
Okay, and does that also mean you need to be very critical to yourself? Because
Yeah, I mean, you should be critical and open to criticism because I mean, no one gets it right.
no one gets
Not,
it right.
not even Google. Not even, I mean, no one can get this right in the first shot, and
Yeah.
that's the thing that the only constant is change.
Yeah.
You have to iterate and find again and make the button green and make it
Yeah.
orange, make it bigger, change position, and then and only then you will find what works best with your setup
Yeah.
and your user.
But obviously, one of the topics you'll always get is, well, we don't have that time.
Mm-hmm.
So considering
Yeah,
that,
resources
it's
and-
a bit concerning. So it would be good to have somebody that can just quickly look at the flow and then give you some tips, and that can be somebody who doesn't know the product.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make most sense?
It makes absolute sense.
Okay. You've given a couple of workshops. I know that at some quite interesting brands like I believe Acer and Akzo Nobel recently. What were questions that those teams, because these are companies that have huge teams often working, having the resources and the time. What were the things that occurred to you and said like, hey, wait, that's interesting, that we would have thought that big brand companies are also spending time on those areas, but they didn't.
It's true. I mean, it always boils down to the same two things. It's either the red routes and how to reach the product in an easy manner.
Yeah.
Because, for example, these two brands are behemoths of the industry and they have massive websites with a massive array of products. So their main struggle is actually how you make people reach the product page. That was often the most conflictive part of the UX process. And then the second one was actually CTA placement, as in where do you put it, if it's a sticky button following you through the website navigation, or if it's something that should be bigger, if it's at the bottom, if it's just so subtle you don't even notice where it is.
Yeah.
So that's really what it always comes down to. It's either how to simplify the journey and make people reach the PDP, product detail page, or where to place a button. Those are the main struggles always, and they just work on it and iterate on it again and try a different path. And I think a good way of doing this is to have a dropout chart and see where users are actually dropping off, because otherwise there's no way you can figure out where these things are happening.
Yeah, so it is really looking at the dropout chart. That I would say is a very good tip for people trying to get started with looking at their UX, really trying to investigate a little bit your probably your Google Analytics or Adobe Insights if you have it, and to look at on what page or what section people are actually dropping off, because then when there's
What's
too
happening.
much. Or
Exactly.
So that makes sense.
You know this thing when you have an issue with your computer and they always ask you to turn it off and turn it on again?
Yeah.
The same thing with this is, why is my CTA not converting? Well, the highest chance is that people are not reaching the CTA in the first place.
Yeah.
And the only way to find this is go to the very basics, which is find this drop-down charts.
Now, the key question from my end, of course, would be, what role would the Where to Buy technology from Hatch play in the entire UX and customer journey? How do you see this?
I mean, I think we have two very good things to our side. First one off is how simple it is to implement, meaning you can put it absolutely anywhere and know that we have a cloud base, you can edit at any time. So meaning that, of course, we cannot help with the flow, the user flow. We cannot really make a big part of that because we're not doing the architecture of the information on the website, but we are very easy to place. And the thing is that with our tool, it's very easy to A/B test. You can have different widgets, you can have all the insights, you can see all the clickers, the event logins, the recurring leads and such, and you can actually get a lot of insight on how things are working.
Okay.
So it can be an out of the box, just use it and it will be easy to work with, or it can be a powerful research tool to see how things are converting.
So if we would recap, then we would say, okay, you've got UX, CX, UX being pretty much more of, I wouldn't even say the theoretical, but it's really the thinking process of how do you want this all to behave, leading towards a good CX, customer experience, leading to a customer journey, which needs to be as short as possible. Obviously, the red route, as you called it. Once you're going through the process, we need to make sure that the call to actions, the CTAs, are visible everywhere, preferably above the fold, or in any case, in a logical sequence.
Easy to reach.
Yeah, easy to reach. Exactly where, how, and when, those are things that constantly need to be tested and differ per industry. So
They're absolutely different depending on the websites.
So it will be very difficult to give any data on that, but obviously, we'll keep trying, I can imagine. Any other pointers you want to give to
I think
the viewers?
The last pointer would be to keep things as simple as possible.
Okay.
Even though you want to have a description and a picture and a lot of data and such, the more crowded your website is, the harder it will be to find the CTA.
Okay.
If you're just going for a tiny product picture, tiny description, and things laid out beautifully, it's going to be way easier to convert.
All right. Well, Alex, thank you very much for sharing your insights.
Thank you for having me.
If I'm not mistaken, there's a very good article, actually a report of the workshops that you've given on the blog. So for any of the viewers, you can also download the entire report or go through it. If you have any questions, reach out to us and we'll be sure to answer your questions as fast as possible. Thank you.
No, thanks.